Well, we're continuing with business attorney Brian King, who has been an attorney in the CSRA for more than 15 years. And how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Great. The last time we chatted, we pretty much went from the beginning of a business when you get started and you form a company to be legal, to get an employer identification number through contracts, and then a buy-sell agreement as well. Nowadays, when we're in the pandemic and you have people that you are trying to hire, and you don't know whether they're employees, you don't know whether they are contractors. How do you sort of determine what determines whether someone should be one or the other?
Well, it's mainly an element of the control that you're going to have over that person. So if you're going to be supplying the tools and the resources for that person to do their job, you're going to be supervising them and, kind of telling them, hey, you do this and then do this and do it this at this time and all of that, then they're going to be more like an employee because you're exerting a lot of control over them. If it's more of, hey, I'm hiring you to do this job and they come in and do it and you just kind of, okay, make sure that it's done and then you pay them, that's more like an independent contractor. And so in the agreements with employees, for example, you could include non-compete provisions, non-solicit, and protect yourself. So you try to keep that employee from going and starting their own business competing with you. Particularly if it's, maybe it's a sales position where they've got a lot of contact with your clients and you don't want them to just run off with your clients and start their own practice. So.
Out of curiosity, I remember from the TV business, I think it was a year that I could not go to work across the street to the competing TV station.
Right.
How have things changed? Like what range of time is pretty typical and standard?
For an employee relationship, so the non-compete will last during the term of the employee's employment. Mm-hmm. And then after the employee is terminated, it can last for up to 2 years. And that's a very standard, accepted by the courts provision.
So 2 years is not too long to ask an employer or contractor.
And then you contrast that with the sale of business context, and 5 years is a typical non-compete period.
I see. Now, does it matter whether the person is working in your office or working from home as to determine whether it's employee or contractor?
It can, if to the extent of control again. If the person is working at home, you probably have less control over them. Although in today's current COVID environment,
sure,
a lot of employees are working from home now, and they're still employees, and they're still having to report in to their employer a lot, and they're checking on them, and they're having Zoom meetings and all this stuff, and so that by itself is not a determining factor on it. There's actually several factors that the IRS looks to determine whether a person is an employee and would thus get a W-2 at the end of the year, or whether they're an independent contractor and would get a 1099 at the end of the year. And so the IRS just looks over those factors, and then the courts, will look at those too, but they look at the control.
Sure.
So,
and who determines whether someone might be a full-time employee or a part-time employee? Are there standards for that?
Well, generally full-time, people think of, 40 hours a week, and
sure.
That's
9 to 5, right?
Right. Exactly. So the Fair Labor Standards Act, can apply to certain employees where if they work more than 40 hours a week, then you would have to pay them overtime. For purposes of benefits like health insurance, 401k, and that sort of thing, 30 hours is usually considered full-time, and the person would qualify or be able to have those benefits if they work at least 30 hours a week. Sorry.
Okay. So using that example, let's say someone is agreeing to work 30 hours a week and they're an employee. Usually it's a 2-week pay cycle. So what happens if they only work 20 hours the first week? What occurs?
Well, sometimes with the benefits, they have to work there for a certain period of time before the benefits kick in. So sometimes it's 60 days, sometimes 90 days, sometimes it can be a year before they can get a 401k benefit. But it just depends on the employer. But if they are generally meeting the hour requirements, then 1 week of not getting there doesn't
Okay.
keep them from being a full-time employee.
Sure. And how about just the amount of time? Do you recommend paying them a salary for those 30 hours, or do you recommend an hourly?
Depends on the job and you know how the business is kind of operating really. You can pay them by the hour, or you can pay them a salary. It really just, usually the managerial employees are more leaning towards the salaried employees, and then and the more manual labor it is more hourly usually.
Right.
So,
Wow. And have any interesting employer-employee situations in the last 18 months come up? Have you heard of any COVID-like situations, or clients of yours just talking about trying to find labor and
well,
things like?
it's there has been seems to be like a shortage of labor in the market right now, and primarily for the lower paid jobs. I mean, so like working at McDonald's or fast food restaurants.
Sure.
I've noticed that they've started increasing the pay, up to $10 an hour for working at McDonald's, but they still have trouble finding employee. And I actually went through the drive-through a couple weeks ago, and they say that they were going to close at 8 p.m. that day because they didn't have enough help.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Wow. That's definitely interesting. And how do you determine whether you should pay an employee overtime or not?
Well, if they're an exempt employee, you don't have to pay them overtime, and it's usually those managerial employees that would apply to. But there's all kind of rules about that, and I've even had been involved in some lawsuits where there was claims that overtime should have been paid and it wasn't, and then there's usually there's a lawsuit, and then there's negotiation, and then you calculate what the pay should have been, and you usually settle
Right.
for somewhere in between. Is usually
Wow.
what happens. But yeah.
Whether it's time and a half or extra time off, maybe.
Well, the comp time, doesn't quite work, or it doesn't solve your problem of not paying overtime. But the calculation for overtime under the Fair Labor Standards Act, when you go to calculate damages, is actually slightly different than the calculation that you would do when you're calculating how much money you have to pay that person for overtime when they are working, and when say, I guess you'd say, before lawsuit and damages.
I follow you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we scoot, any last words of advice for employers or employees or contractors, just from a legal standpoint?
Well, just you just have to try to define the relationship with your employees, and that can be with starting from your offer to them as far as what they're going to be paid and what work they're going to be doing, what your position is, and maybe a job description. And then you could have a employee handbook, and you have your policies written in there, have the employee sign that they have read and reviewed and read the policies, and they're going to comply with them, and then use write-ups if the employee violates the policy. Talk with them about it, write them up if you need to, and if they violate it numerous times, or even one time, I mean, you can terminate that employee. I mean, Georgia is an at-will employment state, and South Carolina is as well. So you can fire the employee for any reason that's not unlawful, such as race or something like that.
Right.
So,
Discrimination.
right.
age, things of that regard.
Right.
Fascinating. That's great. And Brian's website is businessattorneylaw.com, businessattorneylaw.com. Take it from me. Go see him on the front side of your dealings rather than after things occur. Save a lot of time and money that way.
That's
don't
right.
you?
That's right. Yeah, I always try to remind my clients to talk to me before they sign something versus afterwards. Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
Thank you.